If Linehammer has killed the old world, then tonight we feast on its still twitching corpse. It's time to dig in as the ultimate dwarf line of doom takes on a line of swine. And let's dive straight in, shall we? Because people have been itching for that juicy line content. Hook that line up straight into your veins. Here it comes. It's a big old line of Dwarf Rangers full of characters against a load of orcs of the Nomadic Waaagh. So very fast orcs and containing large amounts of one of the things that I think is a good counter to lines, which is impact hits. So that's one of the main things that people have suggested actually as something to counter the mega line of doom, is lots of chariots with their impact hits, and of course because they're all just very small units and this big line of doom can only stand and shoot against one of them at a time, so not many of the line will actually be able to shoot in those circumstances, and then each one does impact hits. But we do have some cavalry in there as well. So the challenge went out at the local club. Would anyone like to challenge the ridiculous line this week? And the orcs have answered that challenge. The orcs owned by fellow YouTube legend over at Close Order. If you want to check out any of his videos. But let's have a look at the dwarf line first of all. So compared to the last game, we have some similarities. We have the same number of rangers. We have 61, making up the bulk of the line. Then we have 2 units of 5 dwarf warriors perched behind them, although for some reason I forgot a couple of dwarf warriors. There's a random iron drake sitting in this unit. Then we have a second unit of dwarf warriors also behind the line, and the reason for that will become clear in a minute. I'll take you through all the heroes then. So those are the 3 non-hero or war machine units that make the list legal. And then hero-wise, we have, if we look down at the right-hand side, we've got Burlock Daminson in there. Oh, the Rangers, by the way, are fully kitted out with their throwing axes and crossbows and shields and all that good stuff. All the stuff you'd expect to see in there, and Rune of Battle on the standard bearer. Yes, it is time to walk the line. Nis. And we've got Giovanni in there as well. Good evening. So, Burlock Daminson prevents the line from being -1 to hit for shooting at long range, which is going to be important, because if I get to go first, I'll be taking a lot of shots at long range in the first turn. And with this small number of drops, there's a reasonable chance of going first as well. We've got a Runesmith in there, and this Runesmith is going to provide Armor Bane 2, which is nice, on top of the Armor Bane that the weapons already have, so crossbows become Armor Bane 4, which is very spicy. And he also gives them flaming attacks, which is not going to be relevant for this game. Also, he can dispel as well, if he gets the chance, because the line's probably going to be in combats pretty early, so it's questionable how much dispelling he could actually get to do. Then we have a Thane BSB there, who is on foot, who has the Master Rune of Grungni, and a Rune of Battle, so 5+ ward save for the entire unit. And is this the most efficient use of the Rune of Grungni that you could possibly do in a game of Warhammer? Or the most efficient use of a 5-up ward banner? Because this unit, with all the characters in it, comes to a total of 1,920 points. And they all benefit from that banner. So that sounds quite efficient to me. But what else has he got? He's also got the Master Rune of Gromril for a 2-up save, and a Rune of Fury, just on the weapon to get an extra attack. So, magical weapons obviously sprinkled throughout where possible, because I don't know what I'm going to be facing with the line. Could be some ethereal stuff in there. And then we have got a king on shield bearers. Now this is an addition since the last game, because I felt like one of the things that might try to take on the line could potentially be some kind of big flying monster that just wants to get into challenges and rack up overkill on you. Because my static combat resolution of the unit is most likely to be 4. So if you get into a challenge, kill something, overkill it, then you can potentially keep winning the combat, keep me locked down, and then move the other units in, and then they won't suffer a stand and shoot because I'm already locked in combat. So the idea is that this guy, this king, is very tough to do any wounds to. So with that in mind, he's been kitted out with the Master Rune of Adamant, which gives him a toughness of 10. which is quite good, as you can imagine. And what else has he got? I think I gave him something else as well. The king. It's Master Embodiment. He's got full plate armor shield. No, he's not got a fancy weapon or anything. He's mainly just there to accept challenges, and the enemy shouldn't be able to wound him very easily. He's also got hand weapon and shield. Ignore the great weapon on the model. I just forgot the hand weapon and shield in my army case on this day. So, he's got 3-up save, Gromril armor, toughness 10. And he's a king. So even if he does slowly take wounds over the course of the game, hopefully I'll keep winning the combat anyway. And obviously I'm not going to be killing any monsters if he's in a challenge, because he's only got a hand weapon. But that's not really the issue. The issue is that I just don't want to be losing combat, because I want the enemy to have to give ground, so that then, if lots of units charge in the next turn, I can stand and shoot against one of them. So you just don't want to lose combat for that reason. But losing combat isn't that big of a deal, because we've also got Thorgrim Ullexen, who, once he drops his Grudge Stone, makes the unit unbreakable. And they also gain hatred against everything, which doesn't make any difference in this game because the enemy are greenskins anyway, so we already would have had hatred. And they're all deployed in a big line. So, let me go back to the wide shot and explain the thinking of the positioning of the characters. So at this end, we have got the 3 squishiest of the characters. We've got the BSB, we've got Burlock Daminson, and we've got the Runesmith. They are positioned behind this piece of terrain, in the line, so that enemies won't be able to charge directly into them. Which is important, because in the first round of combat I don't want any of them to be taking attacks, especially the BSB, who's providing everyone almost 2,000 points of this unit with a 5-up ward save. So that's quite important for the unit to live. By the way, if anyone hasn't seen one of these line games before, this is not the way Warhammer should be played. I'm not going to be taking any lines to tournaments. It's very silly. This is purely experimental, challenging people at the club to see if they want to bring a list that can take on a line and see how it goes, just for comedy purposes. And it's like an interesting puzzle as well. So there we go, 61 Rangers. We've got 5 characters in there. One of them is double wide, obviously the king on shield bearers. So there's very little space down the side of the table, so not much chance of being flanked unless some of them get killed. One thing I should also point out is that it's very difficult to make this unit leave the table in any way, because at least until Thorgrim Ullexen is killed, because since they're unbreakable they can only give ground. If you make them give ground backwards, I've got units behind them, and there's terrain all around, so it's very difficult to give any ground at all, and if you hit them in the flank and try and push them sideways, then in order to win a combat in the flank you probably have to be killing some of them, and if you're killing them, that means that the unit is actually shrinking in size, so that when it does get pushed over to one side, it's not actually going to reach the edge, because the unit's actually got smaller, probably at a faster rate than you are pushing it. So it's almost, at least until he is gone, it's almost immune to any kind of shenanigans that take them off the table. Now, the Rangers, you are actually paying points for their scout ability. And because the enemy was so fast, I decided to deploy fully inside my deployment zone, because I wanted the characters to start in there in turn 1. I didn't want to have to move in there in turn 1, because you can only drop the Grudge Stone at the start of a turn, in the start of turn phase. So, if the enemy go first and get right up to here, and then in my first turn I drop him in there, I can't immediately drop the stone, so the unit would not be unbreakable when everything charges in at once, which is too much of a risk, so we've got the big old line and everyone's immediately in there. The one that I actually want to be hit by the enemy is the king, who's got the toughness 10, so he's right in the middle, waiting to take on the brunt of the enemy attacks. What have the enemy brought to counter the line, as we look at these lovely cinematic shots of the line? Well, we've got a Black Orc boss on a chariot. We've got some Goblin Wolf Riders. We've got a big old line of Orc boars. I'm sure there's about 25 of them. They've got a level 4 shaman in there. They've got the general Orc boss, and they've got a BSB. They've got the Raggedy Flag, I think it's called, in there, which gives them +1 weapon skill. And here are the spells that the level 4 shaman in the unit has access to. Pillar of Fire. Now, lots of Pillars of Fire could potentially be dangerous to the line. One, probably not. Oaken Shield gives the unit a 5+ ward. That could be a big deal if that goes off each turn. Arcane Urgency to move a unit again also could be good. And Hammerhand is an assailment, which is going to be very good. If you're planning on throwing your shaman into the line, then having an assailment spell to cast in there to do some additional damage is going to be good. Anything with -2, it's important to look out for as well against the line, because in close combat I'm going to be using my great weapons mostly, so that means I won't get any armor save against anything that has an AP of 2, so I'll be down to my 5-up ward save provided by the BSB. Then we have got some more Wolf Riders on this side, 2 units of 6 I think it is, and then we've got 3 regular chariots. So, there's your layout. What are your predictions now, everybody? Do you think the dwarf line with the crossbows is going to just make pincushions out of all this, or do you think the vast amount of impact hits is going to be too much for the line? Toldorf says, it'd be interesting to see what the first shooting phase does. Yes, that is also important, more so against this list than in the previous game against Chaos Warriors, because the more of them that are gone by the time they reach the line, the less impact hits there are, which is a big deal, because all these pigs are doing an impact hit each, and then the chariots are doing quite a few each as well. We are going to have some interesting situations that come up, because some of these units can stand in front of each other to provide cover, but then if the unit in front dies, that means I can't also shoot the one at the back, because I'm just one big line. I have to pick one unit I'm shooting at. There are issues like multiple units being in combat. For example, if the Wolf Riders go in here, and no one else is to the right of them as I look at it, then all my dudes down on this side would have to hit the Wolf Riders, because that's the closest unit that's in contact with them. So, when you're multi-charging the line, you can dictate where attacks have to go. The problem is, if that unit of Wolf Riders were to get killed by a stand and shoot, then that's no longer an issue. And that's also racking up easy combat res by throwing them in. Like +6 if I killed them all with a stand and shoot. So do you charge from a lot further distance away to deny turns of shooting, or do you get up really close so that I have to use the throwing axes and less of them can actually see the unit they're shooting at? Which is going to limit the number of shots from the stand and shoot, which is going to do less for my combat res, basically. Interesting conundrums. Let's see how it goes. And the dwarves get the first turn. Toldorf says chariots will be worthless after turn 1. Well, impact hits will be worthless after turn 1, most likely. The dwarves aren't going to be going anywhere. However, the dwarf hatred of the enemy will also be worthless if we get into a continuing combat. So there is potential for it to devolve into some kind of stalemate. So we'll see. Turn 1 for the dwarves. So I had to borrow some of my opponent's dice just so I could roll all 56 attacks. I think, was it 56? It was some obscenely high number. It was over 50 shots anyway. Those are the ones that missed, the cavalry. Those are the ones that failed to wound. And of the ones that wounded, we got 4 6s, so those are going to be AP 4. So that just shreds 4 of them immediately, because the enemy do not have an inherent ward save. They need to cast a spell to get the ward save off. And then these are the ones that wounded with no AP, which leads to another couple of them dying. So 6 die in total from the big block of boar boys. Now, it's a little bit below average shooting, I think, there. I think the wound roll wasn't that great. Let's see how many have we got there. So we've got 12. Because I'm on 4s to wound. I only rolled a single actual 4. And then how many have we got in the fail pile? We've got 5, 10, 15, 16. Yeah, so a bit below average first round of shooting. And the enemy making their armor saves as you'd expect without the AP from the armor bane on these 8. And 6 down, that's okay. It's a reasonable start. We're going to get at least one more turn of shooting in anyway as they advance. We've got Smitchy in the chat. This is how I imagine the Imperial Guard would work the best. A massive endless line of guns to maximise their number advantage. The old world needs fixing, of course. Issues you highlight in your vids. Yes. And for people that are wondering why this is an issue in the game, it's because infantry are not that great. Because cavalry are faster than infantry, obviously. On top of that, cavalry also have swift stride quite often. So there's very little chance of infantry actually successfully making charges in the old world. And you can't even do things like having one line of troops behind another line. So they hit the first one and then you make a furious countercharge into them the next turn, because they'll kill the first one and then just overrun straight into the next one and then counters charging in the next turn. So infantry are at a major movement disadvantage. And the way to mitigate that is to go really wide, because that way everyone in the fighting rank can attack. So even a guy that's 3 feet away on the table, all the way down there, if there's combat happening down here, he can like punch one guy in the shoulder, and then they keep punching the next one in the shoulder until all the attacks eventually get to the thing that they're fighting here. So even if you charge into this unit of 60, and you kill 15 of them, that is still 45 attacks coming back at you. So that's why it's kind of necessary to be wide as infantry in the old world. Obviously, this is taken to the silly extremes, because they should change the rules. They should limit the number of attacks you can get from the fighting rank that aren't in base contact. It should be, I don't know, how many do you think? Like a couple of models either side of base contact are also able to fight. But they also need to amend the infantry rules in other ways, otherwise it's just a massive nerf to them, and they're already bad. So whether you bring in like stepping up, like you had in 8th edition, where the second rank then move forward to fight as well, whether that would make infantry too good if you had like infinite step-ups. But even then, with the current rules, you would still want to go quite wide with them, so you could get even more of those stepping up attacks. So I think limit the frontage that can fight, and allow some kind of stepping up. Or change the game scoring so infantry have another role other than getting charged in the face and being killed. That's what I have to say about it. Giovanni, the step up would solve all the problems, I think. Potentially some kind of step up may want to come in. Yes, so there are issues with the old world, particularly with infantry and how they are at a major disadvantage against some of the other units, like dragons, for example. And, in fact, while I'm on the topic, I was actually discussing this with my opponent during the game, and one of the things I think would help, even if you don't change any rules at all, would be having some kind of scenario scoring, so you're not just trying to kill the enemy. Because I think every unit that isn't a Death Star in the old world is a liability, because all it does is give away victory points when it dies. And I think sacrificing units for positional advantage should be a big part of the game, but I think it is way less significant than it should be, because those sacrificial units are just losing you the game on their own. And often you won't have to even engage a Death Star. You just kill the sacrificial units, and that can be enough to win sometimes. So I think some kind of scenario scoring that maybe force you to be in more than one place at once, so Death Stars would have to be split up at least into multiple units. And also it would give solid blocks of infantry with good defense but not much damage output capability to stay around as well. 8th edition kind of had that with Steadfast, but I think that went too far, because big, really deep blocks of infantry were too good, I think. Or at least it wasn't very exciting to play with. Olaf says sacrificial units are harder to use because of the sheer number of free reforms available. Yes, that's another thing. In the old world, free reforms, there's lots of drilled units around, there's lots of lumbering units that can do free pivots all the time, there's lots of rearranging of your units available to you, so blocking units off and redirecting them is very difficult. And also, what I was saying about when you charge into one unit, you can just freely overrun straight through it into the next one in the line and then count as charging in the next turn. So it's difficult to set up counter charges against a vastly faster enemy than you. Okay, turn 1 for the Orcs. Oaken Shield goes off, so they now have a 5-up ward, these boar boys. And the Wolf Riders are going out a little bit in front, just so that if I'm shooting at the pigs, they will get cover. Am I concerned about that? Well, most of them will get cover. Some of them will be shooting from off the top of the hill, so they won't have to worry about cover. The other unit of Wolf Riders has moved up to completely block line of sight. Now, what they wanted to do with Arcane Urgency was to have a really long second move and just form a really big line that's blocking the line of sight and giving hard cover to most of the Rangers. However, they failed their leadership test, so they're not allowed to march. So all they could do was set up this line here instead. The next turn, there's definitely going to be some charges. So where do I prioritise my shots this turn? Do I go for the pigs? They're one of the furthest back units, and they're less likely to make it in than the wolves, but I'm not at all scared of the wolves. The only issue with the wolves is that if I don't kill them, they can lock down which half of my unit can attack which enemy units by being closer to those models, which could be an issue. Smitchy says, I'm trying to tinker with my Orcs and Gobbos army, and I'm seriously struggling with cavalry units oppositions without having to have that sacrificial unit. Yeah, cavalry is just tough at the moment. Cavalry, big flyers, especially flying cavalry, because they're even faster, and they're not limited by things like intervening units. So, there's more shooting coming up in turn 2 now. Here we go. So, managed to kill another... Is that 3 or 4? Not many boar boys this round, so it's another quite poor round of shooting from the Rangers. Obviously, less of them are firing this time, because some of them are totally blocked by these wolves. But still, the ward save helps out a big deal there as well. 5-up ward, very helpful. And... yeah, so a few of them died, not much. And now it's going straight into turn 2. So my turns are very quick. I haven't really got a movement phase. I'm just going to roll some dice at you, and now it's your turn again. Turn 2 for the Orcs. So we've got... everyone declares a charge. Every single unit, I think, charges. Now, my thinking here is I do not want the Wolf Riders to make it into combat. Because if the Wolf Riders make it in, both of them, and the boars make it in, then the only ones that can attack the boars are going to be the middle of the line here. Everyone else is going to be stuck fighting wolves. So I think I can totally wipe out one batch of wolves with stand and shoot. So I'm going to focus on that and try and get rid of them. Get the easy 6 combat res because they don't have a ward save. And then I'll be free to hit whatever ends up here with my rest of my rangers. So I'm going to fully stand and shoot into this unit of wolves here. Just because they're the closest as well. So they're most likely to succeed with the charge. And obviously they'll get killed. So we're up to 6 on combat res already. From the throwing axes. Because with the throwing axes, the AP that you can gain from that, from the 6 as well for the runesmith, is enough to negate the saves of the wolf riders anyway. So throwing axes are just as good as crossbows against the wolves. Everyone else goes in for the charge. And let's see who makes it. Well, the big line of boars does not make it in, so that's quite a big deal. We do have 3 chariots that make it in, and the wolf riders over here. And that's it. So from the impact hits, you can see they managed to kill 8. So chariots do pack a serious impact hit punch. And because the boars didn't make it in, my strategy of wiping out the wolves on the other side is actually kind of a hindrance now, because I could have instead gone for one of the chariots, tried to get lucky and kill one of them. And now, as it is, we're going to have like 40 great axes that have to attack this unit here. We've got Stu in the chat. Good evening. What madness is this? It is true madness. There is lunacy at work here. We've got a line of 61 rangers plus 5 characters against a line of 25 orc boar boys and various supporting chariots and wolf riders. So, if you look at this, only these models here are going to be able to fight the chariots. Everyone else, all the way down the rest of the line, which is over half the table, have to hit this unit. Because my characters that are touching... or my characters that are not touching will only get 1 supporting attack each, and there's not enough of them to kill the wolf riders at a higher initiative step than the great weapons, which would then mean that their closest thing to them would be the chariots. However, if we look who is now in base contact, we've got Thorgrim Ullexson in contact with a chariot, and Mr. Thorgrim Ullexson is something of a chariot slayer, because he does d6 wounds if he gets a wound through. So he could one-shot a chariot, so that's nice. There are no challenges at the moment, though, because there are no heroes in these units. So no challenges. So, end of combat. I end up scoring... Did I take a picture of the final score there? Okay, yeah, I see. So my opponent managed to score what looks to be 19. So that's a significant amount. And I, by the looks of it, scored 22. So I win combat, everyone else has to fall back in good order, especially the chariots, and off they go. Because this one had to fall back at a strange angle because of the centre of my line is in such a ridiculous position, then it's now actually in my flank, which is really weird setup, but that's how it is. And pushed them away, killed all the wolves, obviously, killed 1 chariot. Thorgrim Ullexson just whomped 1 chariot with his giant weapon. And now we've got another turn to blast these pigs into smithereens. There we go. Combat resolution counter. So because we ran out of space, because the lines are so big, I was using the second row of the combat resolution counter to denote 10 combat res. Okay, so, good start. We have lost some of the line though. Look at that pile of carcasses. Into my turn 3, and I whittle down some more of the line of pigs. Let's see, how big was it? Let's see. how many were there? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19. The next picture, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. Okay, so 5 more pigs dead from short-range crossbow shooting, which is good, I'd say. So next turn, what we're going to face? We're going to face the Black Orc boss on chariot. I think it's a big boss with a load of different saves, so I'm not confident of doing wounds to him. And also, my characters are slowly going to be creeping their way down the unit now as well, which is not ideal. We're going to be hit by probably everything next turn, so we'll see how many of the impact hits I survive. Turn 3 for the orcs. Everyone's charging in, as you'd expect, and everybody makes it in. From the impact hits, that's 8 casualties. And the line is actually shrinking, but it still means that Thorgrim Ulleksson is in combat with the enemy, so he's going to be able to try and kill one again. And you would think he's got a good chance. This is a fresh combat, so hatred is back in effect for the dwarves as well. And after the enemy are finished killing, looks like we're up to, or that might just be the impact hits actually, 11. I only got 2 on the stand and shoot this time, because I tried to kill one of the chariots. Because my thinking was that the pigs, it's not going to be that significant. If I kill a couple of pigs, then it just takes away 1 impact hit. If I kill an entire chariot, then it's quite a big chunk of impact hits that it can remove. Told off, it's a shame the Rangers didn't have hesitation on their banner. Well, the issue is the Rangers can't take enough points on their banner to take the Master Rune of Hesitation, and the BSB doesn't have the option of taking the Master Rune of Hesitation and the Master Rune of Grungni on his banner. So you can only take one of them in this list, which is sad, and it would be great if you could take both, but I can't find a way of doing it. It's very sad, because that would be, I don't see how a cavalry army would even approach dealing with that. If you don't get your impact hits, what are you going to do? Especially if you could then take the other rune that goes with that combo with the Rune of Hesitation, the one that gives you a disordered charge. That would be just a nightmare. But you would have to charge them because they're shooting you. So we are losing dwarves rapidly, and we've now got characters in combat with the Black Orc Big Boss, which is not ideal. So you can see the line is being whittled down. Thorgrim is hanging out on the end though, and he's getting pushed further down, characters getting pushed further down. Look at all those carcasses, and because they shrunk down so far, the BSB was actually in contact, and the Black Orc boss killed the BSB, despite his 2-up save and the ward save, so that means no more ward save for the line. So it's not looking good. The Orcs did well on their attacks, the Rangers didn't do very well on their attacks. Thorgrim did not do well at all. He failed to kill a chariot, he failed to get any wounds through at all. Very disappointing. Even though hatred was in effect this round, I didn't do too much at all. Killed a few boars, lose combat, but being unbreakable, there's nowhere they can really go right now, because they're hit on multiple sides. And so what we were thinking was that they would give ground, and it would technically be at some kind of angle. Would it be kind of give ground in that sort of direction, diagonally away from this unit? In which case they can't, because this unit's in the way and I've got a unit of dwarves there. Is that the correct understanding, or should they just go straight backwards regardless of where the enemy are? So, on to the next turn. You can see the Runesmith is getting killed now, which is sad. The line is shrinking. While we've still got Ulleksson though, they are unbreakable, and we've still got the unkillable king in there as well. So, Maggers says, this is slightly baffling. Is there any strategy to the game? Having just joined the stream, it looks like the green seems to charge, get shot, then charge again. Yes, this is purely a special line challenge game from the local club. I've come up with this ridiculous line asking if anyone wants to bring anything they think can tackle the mega line of doom, and then we just see how it goes. You'll also see that the terrain layout was specifically laid out so that the big line of boars could pass through the middle of it and get to the line in the first place as well. So in a tournament, I think the line would probably be in a better situation from more densely packed terrain, because it's going to limit the enemies coming into you. even though it's going to slightly limit their shooting arcs as well. In my turn, so the unit of Dwarf Warriors that are purely there to prevent the line giving ground early in the game, they're able to flank one of the chariots. And this other unit's just turning around to get ready to do some flanking action of their own. But it's not going too well for the dwarves now, and I'm just not doing very well on my attacks back. And so this is a really weird enchantment spell that the orcs have access to here. This Oaken Shield, which you can cast on yourself, which apparently you can do while you're in combat. But because the runesmith was in combat, the runesmith can't try and dispel it. And then you have an assailment that you cast in combat at the runesmith's unit, but because the runesmith is in combat, the runesmith can't assist in dispelling it. So some very strange rules situations there. And yes, very odd. So we are losing more, but we're holding out hope that Thorgrim Ullexen is just going to whomp a chariot per turn, which I think he is perfectly capable of doing. However, when you look at this combat res, it's not going well for the dwarves. There's no hatred anymore, and Ullexen just keeps missing all of his attacks. He keeps rolling 1s and 2s to hit, he keeps rolling 1s to wound, and he's just having a nightmare down there. But he's obviously not dying, so he's preventing me taking more damage because he's so tanky with his -1 to hit him. Enemy turn 4, so we've still got a challenge raging here between the Ranger champion and the Boar champion. And some of these units are actually going to be forced out of combat now because the line has shrunk sufficiently. Ullexen, well, there we go. Those are his wound rolls. 3 1s. So at this point, because he'd been such a disaster at fighting ever since that first chariot he killed with a single swipe, since then his wound rolls mostly have been terrible. So at this point I decided to start documenting them. So big pile of 1s. Then Burlock Demonson punched himself with his own hammer by rolling a misfire, so he's dead as well. And lovely upside down photos there. Turn 5 for the dwarves, so there's very few rangers left now. But weirdly, it's not all over, because we've got a challenge going now between my unkillable king, who is toughness 10, and the enemy BSB. Thorgrim Ullexen is still in there, so we've still got a chance. But the rest of the rangers get killed, sadly. And, oh, what's that? Another couple of 1s for his wound rolls. I think it's these dwarven dice. I need to get rid of these. And he is slowly being chipped away as well. And now that there are no rangers, these are now separate units. The Dwarf Warriors give ground because they didn't help out the combat too much. And they actually lose 1 to the dangerous terrain, which is quite funny. As they, I think it was fall back in good order, actually. Yeah, because they've gone quite far there. And then Thorgrim Ullexen eventually gets killed by 2 lame chariots. Even though, by rights, surely he should have killed them both way before now. Now, I think you can see, on average, how the game would go. It doesn't become a full-on stalemate, but both sides become less effective as time goes on, because the orcs don't get any of their impact hits. The dwarves don't have hatred after the first round, so it just comes down to who can grind the other one down over time. And at that point, you're just throwing dice at each other, and whoever's dice are better is going to ultimately come out on top. So in this instance, Thorgrim, failing, he's the most potent... Is he the most potent damage dealer? Against something like this he is, because it's d6 wounds it does. So you really want him fighting the chariots, because he can one-shot them. And the fact that he's been failing so consistently hasn't been helping the cause. And everyone's going to be trying to kill the king now, but he is set up to be unkillable with his toughness 10, so we'll see whether they actually can. Dwarf Warriors getting back in there again in my turn 6, but not much going on. Nothing else is going to die from this point now, even though I'm getting flank charges into the boars there with the Dwarf Warriors, and turn 6 for the enemy. So the Dwarf Warriors get themselves killed, but obviously the unkillable king is still alive, and that's how the game will end. So, the line, definitely not unbeatable. The impact hits were a big deal. Obviously my own dice rolling wasn't optimal, but even then I think it's still a tricky one for the line with all the impact hits coming in. Because if you can significantly shorten the line early, and you're limiting how many attacks can come back in subsequent turns. So if in the first round, if you're killing like 20 of them, second round, if you can do the same again, suddenly they're only going to be throwing like 20 dice at you rather than 40 or 50, which is quite a big difference. So if you can get the charges in there and do impact hits multiple times, that's obviously a big deal. And impact hits are a big weakness of the line. Chariots in particular, because as I was saying about the stand and shoot, if you only stand and shoot against one unit, and that one unit, if it's a chariot, it's narrow, so not many of the unit will actually be able to shoot it, so you're probably not going to kill it on the way in. And then those impact hits are devastating. There are ways of wrangling the list so you do avoid impact hits, but that means dropping the 5+ ward save banner. And I think that is so damn good. The other way you could do it, I think there are some units where you could put the Master Rune of Grungni on them and run that nearby to the line, which then gives the line a 6+ ward save in the shooting phase only. And then that would allow your BSB to then have the Master Rune of Hesitation and go in the Ranger unit. So there are other tweaks you can make, but I still feel like I would rather just have a ward save. I don't think my ward saves were particularly good rolls during this game. You can see I was taking a lot of casualties. I don't think I was saving a third of them, which is what you should get on a 5+. And is Grungni the BSB only? It may well be. I think it might just be too expensive. What about if you're running Royal Clan? Can you afford it in like a unit of hammerers then? Let's have a look. Master Rune of Grungni. No, Battle Standard Bearer only. I see. Yep, so you can't even do that with it. So it has to go on the BSB. And Rangers can never take enough runes to take the Master Rune of Hesitation unless you're running them in Royal Clan, which means they have to go in the rare section. So you would need to fill up your core with something else then, which kind of defeats the purpose of the Mega Line of Doom. So we see weaknesses to the line here. Do you think there is a dwarf line that counters this list here? So I'd be interested to know. Let's have a look in the chat there. Stu says, I think the line will hold, assuming the dwarf shooting is even half decent. Well, if the dwarf shooting is successful, like turn 1 I killed 6, which was okay, but I did roll below average still, so potentially could have killed more of them. Should I instead have been targeting chariots the whole time, instead of trying to kill the big line of boars? Because the chariots were doing serious impact hits. But the boar unit is the one that's got the 5+ ward save on it, so maybe after turn 1, maybe I should have switched to shooting something else that didn't have a ward save. The problem is, if you roll well and kill 8 boars, that same roll would only kill 1 chariot, even though it's only got about 4 wounds. So it feels like you're wasting damage if you're shooting a load of shots into something that you could massively overkill. So yeah, it felt like everything had to go into the boars, because that is one way of guaranteeing you're not going to be wasting any of those shots, because there's always going to be another model for you to kill. I wonder if there's any other characters that we could put into this line to make it better against this. My opponent was saying that he was glad there wasn't a Thane with the exploding handgun of doom, the machine gun Thane of doom. I don't know whether he fits into this list very well, because if you put him in the line and the enemy charge the other end of the line, then he can't use his standard shoot against them, because he has to personally be able to see them. If you keep him outside the line, if you put the line, for example, in front of a hill, you put him on the hill so he can see the enemy, then there are opportunities for the enemy to attack him on his own. And things like, let's say Pillar of Fire, could cross over the whole unit and also cross over him, which is quite scary. And Pillar of Fire, you often don't have time to react to it, because it gets the chance to move twice before you do, because it moves at the start of your turn. So if you're caught outside of a unit, then you get hit by a vortex first, which is quite scary. Stu says, I wonder if Empire Arcane Journal will have rules that make infantry heavy list viable. I wouldn't bet on it. I would not bet on that at all. So, the line experiment continues. And the Nomadic Waaagh prove that the old world is not dead, the line has not killed it, but the line is silly and it is potentially powerful against the right opposition, but not overpowered, which I think we all knew anyway. The mega line is not overpowered. There will be some armies that can just do nothing to it, just because of the way they've built their list, but I think your average competitive Warhammer army will have ways of doing something to it. It's obviously very effective points denial if you have an army that can't dish out that much damage over the course of the game. It's very possible that you just don't score the points for the line at the end. So I think most of the competitive armies, though, have some way of dealing with it. Mitchie says, is there an upcoming army you're particularly interested in? You mentioned Death Stars earlier, and obviously Dark Elves at the moment are not a GW-supported army, and had a good Death Star army. Armies I'm interested in, are you talking about interested in playing? Because I do have a partial Bretonnian army on the way, although I was looking at my photos of my painted miniatures and realised that it's been a good 6 months since I actually finished painting a Bretonnian unit. Time does fly when you're painting Dwarves and Stormcast Eternals and various other game systems. I'm painting some Star Wars stuff at the moment while assembling Age of Sigmar stuff. There are lots of Bretonnian men-at-arms on the painting table, though, that occasionally do get a few extra brush strokes on them. It's the fact that there is, how many are there? There are about 40 of them. So once they're done, I can move on to the Knights. That would speed things up a bit, because I don't really need to paint more Dwarves now. I've got plenty of Dwarves. And I'm going to be looking at some non-line Dwarf lists as well. And looking at ways to try and make the Dwarves more competitive without resorting to lines at all. So, like, no lines. But the way the rules are, you eventually end up in sort of a line, whatever happens, because you want to be as wide as possible when you start fighting. So you'll have like drilled units of hammerers or longbeards or whoever are your fighting units that will then go wider when the fighting starts, and then wider still as the fighting continues. So you do end up in kind of a line. It's just the start of the game looks more like a traditional rank and flank fantasy game, because you are in slightly more of a block. In fact, often in marching column, if you're yeeting yourself across the table with the anvil as well. So I'm going to look for some alternative dwarf options. Maybe I need to give the gun line another go, as in lots of guns, war machines, and multiple small units. I always see multiple small units as a liability in this game because they just die and give away their points, whereas a big unit that is your entire point value, you have to kill the whole thing before you score the points for it. Whereas a small unit, you just kill a few dudes and there's like 100 points for you. So you're well on your way to winning just by killing a few small units. So points denial is a thing that is quite important in the old world, I think, with the way it's currently scored. So hopefully there are some tweaks to that over time in the rules as well. Okay, hopefully people are enjoying Linehammer. People are enjoying being part of murdering the old world and dancing on its grave, desecrating its grave, befouling its grave, soiling its grave, besmirching its good name. And hopefully you'll be back for more. When is the next Old World tournament, I hear you ask? Well, the next one I've actually got a ticket for is, if we look at my calendar here, there is in very early January, there is a mega Old World event, which is 3,000 points, which I will obviously be taking Dwarves to. What kind of list do you think would be good for the Dwarves at 3,000 points? I think the triple organ gun has to come in, obviously, because that's just going to be really fun in a big mega game. Iron Drakes, that's going to be the entire rare slot, organ guns and Iron Drakes. In core, obviously, Rangers, you would think, a decent sized unit of them. Hammerers, Iron Breakers, I've got as options. I've got loads of characters, all the characters available. I've got other shooting units. I don't think miners are really up to much, sadly. Doom Seekers. Double anvil. Is that a challenge for me to get a double anvil ready for then? I would have to paint another one. I've actually got a Bad Squiddo anvil. So I could try double anvil at the Mega Battle event. That could be interesting. I'll definitely ponder that one. If I took a double anvil, a big unit of hammerers with like Ungrim in there, and another unit, just a really tanky unit like Iron Breakers with a really murdery king in there. That could be fun. Or Iron Breakers with like Thorgrim in there, put them into where I want them, and then drop the Grudge Stone. Unbreakable Iron Breakers with their nice armor save, that would be nice, although no one would attack them. So I'll ponder on that. We've got a month to think about it. And plenty of other tournaments coming up as well. The next tournament of any kind is actually Star Wars Shatterpoint. And I'm currently painting Obi-Wan and Queen Armadillo and all their pals ready for that. That's a fun game. Very different to all the other games I play, obviously. So, if you enjoy the content on this channel, if you think that you want to be enabling my behaviour of creating ridiculous lines and testing the mechanics of the game to its limits, if you want to facilitate that kind of nonsense, then why not pledge your entire life savings to the Patreon or the PayPal links in the description. And most of that money will get funneled directly into buying miniatures, I can guarantee you that. That's pretty much where all my money goes nowadays. Buying miniatures and paying for tournament tickets. Those are my two main life expenses, I think. And don't forget to check out all these social media shenanigans. If I haven't added a Blue Sky link down there yet, I am on there as well. And Discord server, which is a hub of activity. People discussing all the different game systems that I play, of which there are many. So, Old World, Age of Sigmar, Kings of War, Dead Zone, Dreadball, Star Wars Shatterpoint, Bolt Action. That's 7 games, I think, and those are the ones that I'm currently, like, actively playing or trying to play or attending events for or running events for. There are more games coming as well, because there's Mantic's Epic Warpath, which is coming at some point in the next few months, I imagine, because I backed the Kickstarter for that. Relics is coming back, so we're up to 9 game systems that I'm going to be playing. What else have we got? I'm just glancing over my shoulder. Not particularly interested in 40k at the moment. I'd be more likely to play 40k 2nd edition, to be honest. I don't really have an army for it. I've got some Space Marines that are mostly about 10 years old, so they're not as cool as the 2nd edition ones. And I think, is that enough game systems for one person to play? I don't know. And I also now can no longer relate to people that just play one game and like that's their whole thing. People who dedicate their lives and dedicate all their free time to one game system, I can't wrap my head around that anymore. Paula says, I do wonder if a unit that doesn't stand and doesn't shoot works better. Can you go in with the mindset of I'm just going to force a draw? The problem with that is that if the enemy decide that they're not going to win the fight, they just sit there and take a draw. And you don't have any way to force them. So you need some way of bringing them in, which is why I think Rangers are the perfect unit for the line. Because you don't want to be settling for draws. So the fact that you're shooting them means that they're more likely to want to attack you in some way. So you do get a game. With just a long line of combat troops and no shooting output whatsoever, you do risk certain opponents who have armies that just don't match up very well against it, thinking, well, it's not going to go well, so I'll just hide, take a draw, let's just shake hands now, I'm not going to go forward, you're not going to reach me by the end of the game, let's just sit here and chat for 3 hours. Yeah, because I do like Rangers. They are a very good unit. I need to do a Dwarf tier list, actually, as well. Spoiler alert, I think Rangers and Iron Drakes are going to be very high on it. Miners will probably be F tier, because they're so bad. And other than that, I think it's about time to wrap this video up. Hope you're enjoying all the spicy, succulent content that's killing the old world. And all that remains to be said is, good night out there, whatever you are, and stay inside the line.